Okay,
Over to you, ladies.
thank you. Just a second. Yeah, so today my partner in crime is Maheshwari, and we both will be addressing the last unit of Block 4, which is basically impediments to problem solving. And as you all are familiar,
Can you see the slide, Simran, the second slide? Simran. Can everyone see the second slide?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. But we can't hear Simran. If Simran is speaking, we can't hear.
Yeah, Simran has
think
gone
she's
on mute,
muted.
looks like. She doesn't.
Simran, please
Simran, you
unmute
are on
yourself.
mute.
I muted you just now because there was no voice earlier. Just check now. We can't hear you. You're not audible.
She's not to be seen.
No, but she should be audible, right?
on
She's not
screen.
audible. You're not audible, Simran. Let me pause it for a
I was sharing was that what essentially happens is when we look at problems, it's something which brings in a difficulty to achieve or accomplish anything that we want to do. So that's a very basic thing about problems. And when we look at problem solving, I prefer to quote Whitting and Williams here, where he says that the use of thought process to overcome obstacles and one works towards the goals. So essentially what we're saying is that the entire problem solving process is a lot with our cognitive level of thinking and how we kind of, run the entire issue in our heads and then try to bring out, probable solutions, work out alternatives, and try to bring a resolution to an issue. Yeah. Now, when we look at problem solving, we wonder why do these attempts fail? And that's what this chapter is all about, where we're going to be talking about the barriers and obstacles to problem solving. And we just link it back to unit 1 of this block, where the problem space has been discussed in detail. Yeah, so I won't go back there, but just to take it in continuation from there, problem space, if it's not adequately, searched, or if it is problem is not well represented in the very first place, then you are just setting up yourself to, have a failure. Yeah. And the two classical approaches, obstacles, which we will be talking in this particular piece of work today are Einstellung and functional fixedness, which are proposed by Gestalt psychologists. Yeah. So functional fixedness is something which will be taken up in detail later by Maheshwari. I'll leave that bit for her. And going forward, before we move into the subject, if you recall, when we see the objectives of this unit, it talks about being able to understand what are the differences between problems and dilemma. So I just thought I'll briefly touch upon that bit. So problem is something when we are looking at a solution, right? We want a resolution to a particular issue. Whereas dilemma is something where we are at a crossroad and both the alternatives, if I want to go to left or I want to go to right, both are unfavorable. They are not desirable. So I'm in a fix. What do I do? Now, we just link this up to our the next aspect of our teach here, where we say when we come across any such problems or dilemmas where we don't know what is the right way of doing it, that's where the two models come into the picture. Models of problem solving, which is the Hans model and the Halls model. So please remember, which is again very commonsensical, but nonetheless, when we do come across a dilemma of a right and wrong, the core decision maker is ethics. Yeah. What is the ethical issue? And that's what both the Haynes and Halls model talk about. And there is a small question which has come up in the past, so you'd like to probably note down. So this has come in the exam previously. Don't get perturbed by the content on the slide. That much I've put there for you all to read, through in your free time if you'd like to know more about it. I'll just briefly touch upon the two because it's a very small marker question which is. So the core things you need to remember is that both the models are related to ethical problem solving or ethical dilemmas, resolution to that. Yeah. So Haynes model was proposed by Felicity Haynes from University of Queensland, where she suggests it's a three-step approach, and it comes forward in the form of reflective questions. And the core three things which she says are, when you're looking at a problem and you're trying to figure out a solution, you see what are the consequences of my decisions? How will they impact the person concerned? The agents involved, are they, working towards with ethical principles in place? And lastly, do we really care about the people, for whom the decision making or the problem is being resolved? So that's about it. So these are the three core things when we look at the Haynes model. You just need to remember it's a three-step approach, and there is a set of reflective questions which one needs to address, which are again focused on ethics. Yeah. Hall's model was, proposed by Alan Hall, and Hall's model was proposed by Alan Hall from University of Waikato, and this revolves around, the educators and the students. So it says it basically offers a set of questions that educators can use, consider before deciding what they ought to do when confronted with ethical problems. So here the primary questions which one would, kind of look at are, what is the basic issue, concerned with the problem? What principle is at risk? So since we're looking at, students, we'll consider the student autonomy being impacted, justice being given to them, and the larger good for the students. Yeah. And then we look at the possible course of action. And lastly, who will benefit, and will the benefits be more than the harm? So that's a bit on the Haynes and the Hall's model. Then we move on to the first obstacle, Einstalling. I take you back there. The Gestalt psychologist talked about. So Einstalling was proposed. It is very simple. It just says that, our prior knowledge or experience can sometimes, be the actual cause of hindrance to solve a problem. So typically when we say that, somebody comes with X numbers of years of experience, and that would, that person would be bringing a lot of value to the table, right? We're basically contradicting that. We're saying that, if somebody comes, with prior experience, that experience itself could, kind of impinge or stop the probable solution, where you might not be able to see the obvious. Yeah. So we say basically your prior knowledge is harming the performance. And this was proposed by the Gestaltists, and they say it is this effect, the Einstalling effect, is nothing but a tendency to set the mind into a routine approach to problem solving. So I'm so used to doing something that, I just can't think beyond that. And something very obvious is something which I might miss out. Yeah. So the Einstalling effect eventually kills creativity and innovation. And how this can be overcome is when you introduce innovative solutions and you brainstorm with others. Now I'd like Maheshwari to take you through solutions. What is our problem? Maheshwari, over to you.
Yes, Simran. So there's an interesting experiment that Luchin did, which was like repeating a particular problem. So he said that repeating a particular problem solving method can make a person blind to any alternative ways of solving a problem. So he did one water jar problem. If you refer to the page 43, there are 6 problems that are given, where there are 3 jars, and these 3 jars are of different capacities, and one has to reach the goal of the capacity that is required. So what he did is, in this, he gave 6 problems. If you look at the first, all the 6 questions, you will see that the method one can use to kind of solve this problem. So the first method, if you see, if you look at jar A, jar B, and jar C, the solution would be, using the formula B minus A minus 2C, you will be able to arrive at the goal of that particular capacity that they are looking for. Now, the second problem, when you solve, you can use the similar formula. So when a person gets kind of used to it, he's able to, see that he can use the same formula for all the 6 problems that are mentioned in page 43. Okay, but when you look at problem 6, what we tend to ignore is it's, you don't have to really go by the formula that we were using all this far, but you could simply, to arrive at the goal of 20, you could just would have done 23 minus 3, and you could have arrived at the same. So even you can arrive at the using the same formula as well, but it could have been a simpler approach that one could have used. So primarily the Einstalling Einstalling method says that one tends to not search the problem space for the alternative solution, and go by the similar method. So it's like one size fits all, so we tend to apply that everywhere across. In many competitive online exams that you will see for children, this kind of Einstilling effect is used for them, where few problems will be given in a particular way to solve, like simple mathematical problems, but the next few will have a slight different way of doing it. But the child may not be able to really catch it and end up making mistakes. So once you kind of, solve these such kind of problems, your Einstilling effect can be reduced to a large extent. So that's what is one of the classical obstacle in problem solving of Einstilling. Over to you, Simran. So Einstilling actually has not really come in any exam so far, but it's an interesting concept, just to kind of have a look at. Simran? Simran, are you there? Hello? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
we can hear you. Maheshwari, we can hear you. We can't hear Simran.
Simran just texted that she's not able to hear anyone.
There may be some network issues. Give it a minute, maybe.
Simran, I think you have to log off and log in again, yeah.
Ritika, do you want to stop the recording?
This is very much Simran.
Okay.
Don't single me out like that, Maheshwari.
Okay. I think we'll just go ahead with this bit. I'm sorry. I think, are you all, can you hear me now?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay, I'm on my phone, so I just wonder how long I can hold on to it like this. But nonetheless, we'll just go ahead. Really sorry for this, guys. Okay. Maheshwari, you're through with the jar explanation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, before, you can take a moment and go through this slide if you want to, but I'd like to share a real life problem with you and then take you through this piece. Yeah. So are you all ready for my narrative? Don't miss out on anything. Huh? It's a small story that I'm going to share with you. So, and I'm going to link up the content with that bit. Yeah. Okay. So this goes back as this Sunday afternoon when me and my husband, along with my 6-year-old son, we decided to, go for a bike ride. And it was a lockdown. And we had a wonderful afternoon. We enjoyed ourselves. And on the way back, just a few kilometers short, we had a puncture in the tire. And we'd gone out with my neighbor. His kids were also, on the other bike with us. And now we were stuck. It was middle of the afternoon and we had no idea how we're going to, resolve this issue. So this was a huge problem in front of us. And just to quickly share with you what we really did was, so my neighbor decided that, my neighbor and my husband, they decided that, okay, first his kids need to reach home. So he said, I'll go and drop my children. And on the way, I'll, come back and see if I can find a mechanic on the way. I'll bring him along with me. Yeah. And me and my husband had just got vaccinated a day before. So we had this thing in mind of, that exertion thing we shouldn't be doing. So I was a little worried that, how we're going to really drag this bike back home all the way. And of course, in that scenario, I didn't want to leave my husband behind and go back home with my son. So, but for my husband, the entire situation was different. For him, the larger concern was to send me back home with my son. And he said, I'll manage with the bike and I'll see what we can do. And I was getting into the argumentative mode with him. In the meanwhile, he had, without my knowledge, he had already booked the Uber. And we were contemplating what to do. So I was telling him, why not leave the bike here? So he didn't find that a safe place. He said, nothing doing. And he said, you go home and we'll figure it out. So the decision was taken that once the Uber is there, I'm heading home. And I told him, get back to me if I need to come and pick you up. So the car was at home. I said, you just drop the bike. If you don't get a mechanic, I'll come pick you up and then we'll see on Monday what we can do about it. So those were the plans that we made. Eventually, the neighbor and his kids reached home. I reached home with my son, and my neighbor went back to help my husband through with it. And luckily, they found a mechanic. The issue was resolved, and they both came back home. Yeah. So any gaps here? You all understood the narrative? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So now I bring it back to this context where we're saying the first core aspect is understanding the problem. How was it really interpreted? We had a clarity on what are the attempts we are going to make to solve this issue, right? We wanted to devote the time and effort needed to kind of initially structure it out, who goes where and how we kind of close this issue. And we also looked at immediate problems in its relation. So the broader mission for us was the kids' safety, and then we probably look at the bike and how we managed to bring it home. Yeah. The larger goal was what? Me and the kids and the neighbors' kids reaching home, and then the secondary goal was to address the bike. Yeah. How did we overcome these constraints? So when we're saying the problem solver must adequately anticipate many of the constraints. So when I looked at this entire issue, I realized that we also did the similar thing. We anticipated the constraints. We were factoring in not finding a mechanic. We were factoring in that we might have to leave the bike somewhere. So there was we were planning things simultaneously. And if you again have to look at the tendency to plan in advance, we had seen to it that fuel up the bike before we left, not realizing that tire puncture would be an issue which we might come across. Yeah. We responded adaptively and adapting to the situation and flexibility. So we were open that okay, in case we can't find a mechanic, we leave the bike here. Yeah. And not viewing the constraint as a major impediment. Now our choices were that we could stand in the middle of the road and fume and fret about it, or maybe pick up an argument, etc. But we didn't do any of that. We instead kind of worked out ways and means of constructively closing this issue and coming back home. So does this make sense? Are you able to understand these three concepts by way of my example? Any questions here?
Oh, very well explained, Simran. Very nice.
Okay. So we all are on the same page?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you for that. So coming to the last aspect, typical process in solving a problem. Now, if you again look at the narrative and see, what did we do? We thought through the solution process in detail. We developed an explicit action plan. Yeah, we were clear what we want to do. Then we collected data, in terms of who goes where and how we go about closing this issue. We were monitoring the progress. So when I reached home, I was constantly in touch with my husband. I kept calling him to figure out, where was he? And then has my neighbor reached back to him? And once I got a confirmation that yes, they both are together and they found the mechanic, I was a little more settled. And in this entire process, the three of us consulted each other, as to what are the workable solutions. And finally, we followed it up and closed it. Yeah? You clear with this? We move to the next slide. Any questions here?
No, Simran, absolutely fine. Move ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now come to impediments to problem solving. Again here, instead of going into the slide, I'll just take you quickly through one brief, a therapy session between, so I'm training to be a psychotherapist, so that's where my example comes from. And so if you typically, and some of you would be holding a counseling experience, so I think you all will be able to relate to this. So typically what happens in a counseling session between a therapist and a client? If you just quickly run through that entire process, what do we really do? There's an intake form which the therapist offers to the client. The client fills it up. The administrative aspects are kind of discussed. The core background information is collected about the client. How many sessions would one want to go through? What would be the cost per session? Number of hours, etc. All that is streamlined. Then we move on to defining a joint ownership, where we clarify to the client that it has to be a process where even they are willing to bring about the changes. Yeah. Once that commitment is made, we go about hearing the client out and understanding what's the concern. And once we've heard the client out, what do? We paraphrase and we kind of reiterate and get a clarity if we are on the same wavelength and whether the therapist has understood the client's problem and issue well. Yeah. Once that is frozen, the next step is the therapist will apply certain techniques, right? Whatever is the professional expertise of that therapist, he or she would like to use those and help the client with his current situation. And as he does that, and as the process goes forward, those techniques could be maybe a 2-chair process or maybe some kind of visualization which makes the client comfortable. One will be doing all of that, right? Then eventually, as we go forward in the process, the therapist might analyze the situation and maybe creatively think if some changes need to be made as the session progresses. So that's again based on his or her expertise, right? Eventually, once the therapist feels that the client is ready for some kind of a closure in that session, they will offer that closure and finally close the process. Yeah. Are we clear with this, the series of events which take place at a typical therapy session? Now, if we bring that same session back into this context, what is happening? What are the impediments to problem solving? Just the opposite. What would happen if there was no methodology followed by the therapist? If there was no intake form, there was a lack of commitment in solving the problem from both the parties, or the problem was not clearly understood by both. Yeah. If the therapist was not adequately trained, or still there was a lack of knowledge at his or her end to help the client with the resolution, followed by any kind of inappropriate method used. Maybe the client was facing some severe issues and maybe needed to be referred to a psychiatrist rather than being addressed through a counseling session or a therapy session. So things could have gone wrong there. Further to that, if there was the information shared or collected was not accurate, that itself could have stalled the entire process. And finally, if the therapist was unable to use critical thinking or analyzing how the session can be handled based on their professional expertise, then also the entire process could have gone wrong, right? So just the opposite of a typical therapy session is what I've used to understand the kind of impediments to problem solving. Are we clear with this? Any questions?
No, Simran, none from my side.
Thank you. So moving forward, we are looking at productive problem solving. Now, and what are the requirements here? Again, there has to be a clear description of the problem. And if I briefly again touch upon the narrative that I shared with you, we are saying description of limiting factors. So in our case, the limiting factors were non-availability of a mechanic. Yeah, the constructive factors available for us was our neighbor with us who could have helped us in this situation. There was a clear delineation of the ownership of the problem. So my husband was very clear, this is my issue, right? So his kids need to reach home first, and then we'll see what we need to do with the bike and my family. So there was a clear-cut ownership was very clear. The description and scope of the problem was clear for us, and the consequences, if it's not resolved, we were ready to leave the bike wherever we could. And we brainstormed on the way, and finally the system of ranking. What do we do first? Who goes where and who comes back? All of that was done, and that is how we came to a productive problem solving. Yeah, we're clear with this bit. Moving on to the next piece, Maheshwari. Yeah. So what do we really do when it comes to brainstorm? I'll just quickly run you through this. We express our ideas. We deem no idea while to be considered. The number of ideas coming forward is very important. There has to be a free flow of information that we can bring in everything. And a word of caution when it comes to brainstorming is that criticism should not come in, because that would immediately block the flow of ideas coming in. So those are the aspects which we need to keep in mind. And when we're looking at effective problem solving, we are also questioning what are the questions which come forward. Am I procrastinating? Am I really delaying this? Am I avoiding the problem? Am I in denial? Am I shutting down or blocking my creativity to solve this problem? And am I ignoring suggestions from people in terms of how one can solve it? And then finally it comes to magical thinking or fantasy. So when I correlate to this to myself, so for me personally, decluttering of my cupboard is a big issue. So magical thinking for me comes in when I really wish that my mom would be here and she would do the cleaning for me. Yeah. So that's how I correlate to this bit. Moving forward, Maheshwari, we move to the next piece, which is I think critical thinking. Or is it impediments? Maheshwari, are you there? Yeah. So this again is impediments to productive problem solving. So I've just given these core 3 words, and I will not go into the detail of all these pointers. So what we're essentially saying here is that when we look at blocks and obstacles to problem solving, they essentially stem out from our behavior, thinking, and our attitude. What is our approach to it? So some of us might have a fear of going wrong. Some of us might be perfectionists. Some of us might get stressed or get anxious when we come across a problem. So each one to ourselves and how we respond to an issue, those could also lead to blocks to problem solving. So these are very basic, and I will not go into the details of this. And also they are being taken up in detail by Maheshwari when she comes to the blocks bit of it. Next one, please. Yeah, my favorite one. So problem solving in teams and small groups. So again, I'll take you through an example here. Our own study group, this one where we are right now. So what's happened here? If we just take a moment and see, we have some stalmarts here like Ritika, Seema, Praharsh, Prashant, Dr. Anju, and many others. Please forgive me if I've missed out on some critical names here. What have we all done? We came up with this idea. We created a WhatsApp group, and we decided to, kind of run a self-study thing. And we've allocated chapters to people, and, all of us are coming forward. There is a free flow of communication happening. There is hardly any negativity, which I see in the group. Everybody wants each other to, go through the entire learning process in a fun and enjoyable way. We're encouraging people to finish their assignments as we go along. And the goals and agenda are very clear. We are open to learning, and we want to ensure that we all clear the exam with an excellent understanding of psychology. That's how I see it. And there is an excellent participation by the group. So people are volunteering, coming forward, and seeing whatever they can do in terms of helping. So just the opposite of what we are doing is what is a problem when we look at problem solving in teams. Lack of structure, poor communication, no communication, negative attitudes, no goals or agendas, and overall lack of participation of people. Yeah. And apart from this, there are also emotions, learning styles, each one to their own, gender, cognitive barriers, and lack of transfer structures. This again would be taken in detail by Maheshwari. Moving on to the last part of my bit is critical thinking in problem solving and impediments. So essentially what we are saying is critical thinking is got to do with the becoming aware of the assumptions that exist, clearly stating those assumptions, and also assessing their accuracy. Now, when we look at critical thinking, there are also certain misconceptions about critical thinking where people end up thinking it's a negative process. It will lead to relativistic freeze, where we are unable to, make commitment to people and ideas and structures. And they also see it as a very traumatic change. That's how it's perceived, because, it encourages you to break away from old assumptions, and people generally don't like to break away from old assumptions. So these are the misconceptions which, revolve around critical thinking. And apart from that, there are other fallacies with respect to problem solving, which are irrelevant reasoning. We generalize, and there's a slippery slope. We say either I go by train or I go by bus. So there is a lack of decision making sometimes, and emotions appeal to people at large. So one is not very willing to buy logic sometimes, but yeah, emotionally, if we take certain decisions, appeal more to people. So critical thinking ends up taking a backseat. On that note, I hand you all over to Maheshwari. Thank you very much.
Simran, can you just quickly talk about these 3 steps again? I didn't understand. Becoming aware that assumptions exist. Like, I didn't understand this.
So when we're saying, when we're looking at critical thinking, what we're saying here is that there are 3 steps involved. Just let me have a look at the book as well once, since you asked for a clarity. Just a moment, huh? Yeah. So we're saying, first of all, we need to be aware that there are, certain assumptions that are existing when we're looking at a problem, and critical thinking solutions towards it. Yeah. Then we outline those assumptions explicitly. We pen them down. Once we pen them down, we link it up and we see how accurate are they, and do we really want to see? Because when we look at critical thinking, we are coming up with a mirage of ideas. Now, it isn't essential that all those ideas or all those solutions might be fitting into the problem as a solution, right? So you need to kind of basically classify. So we first, list those down. We become aware of those assumptions. We, explicitly state them, and then we assess how accurate they are to the specific problem-solving attempt.
Right. Got it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Maheshwari, over to you.
Thank you, Simran. Thank you. Moving on to the next section of this unit, other barriers to problem solving. So when we are solving any problem, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? It could be like, oh God, which could be an emotion that you're expressing, or you would say, oh God, I cannot do this problem, which could be, a mind telling that it's a block, that you may have even while looking at the problem. So there are certain barriers when we are trying to solve a problem. And in this chapter, these barriers have been categorized into 6 major blocks, which is perceptual, emotional, intellectual, expressive, environmental, and cultural. So we have also given a quick tip as how you can remember these in any of these forms that you may seen, right, which works for you. So peace is something which I had identified for myself, and Simran came up with the other 2. But yeah, whichever works for you can help remember. Moving on to the perceptual blocks. So what are perceptual blocks? Blocks that enables to a person to clearly perceive a problem or information needed to spark the solutions, the effective solutions. So when you look at this picture on the right side of the perceptual block, what do you see? What do you identify from this picture? Anyone?
A man is blowing a trumpet or something.
Yes.
Woman's face also.
Right, you are right. So as
See
you
a
can
lady there.
Yeah, there is a young lady as well. You are right. So there are 2 pictures merged in this. So, the first block that you would see, there are about 5 points that are there under perceptual block, seeing only what you expect to see. So, what you want to see, you will end up seeing that. So you may only see this one person playing an instrument, or a girl, or you could see both also. So what happens is when you want to see only what you expect to see, you obscure the true nature of a problem, and you narrow down, your approach towards solving a problem. You may exclude the relevant information, or you may include certain information by assuming it. So assumption also becomes one form of a block while you are trying to solve a problem, right? The second one is stereotyping, where you generally have a biased opinion on something, and you tend to label some situation or some people for that matter. So in a work setup, if you see somebody very lazy, you may label that person as somebody who's not working hard. You may label that person as lazy. While when you step aside, and what can happen is you're probably overlooking the fact that his work is too monotonous, or he's not equipped enough to function in that particular activity or job that has been given to him. So we tend to do a lot of stereotyping, even in a problem setting, or at workplace, or even in our day-to-day life situations. So in the other example that I have in the stereotyping is now that we know that COVID as a virus was created at China, and when in future, if anybody has to work with Chinese men, you may stereotype them as those are the people who actually initiated this whole biological warfare. So that could be a stereotype, but that's generally what happens is even in a situation when you're looking at a problem, you may just term it as bad. Oh God, I cannot really work on this. And that itself will kind of stop you from even looking at further in the problem. The other one is not recognizing the problem. So sometimes when you procrastinate a lot, it comes to a situation when it becomes an emergency one and a severe one, and you have already reached a block state at that point in time. Not seeing the problem in perspective, not seeing the whole, problem in its entirety. Let's take an example, the similar example which I took earlier, that the person who's not performing really well. You may term, when you're having a discussion with that person, you may see that, okay, these are the activities that he's not performing really well and that we should not really look at him further. But the other thing which is blocking you from looking at it is what are the other resources or what are the other things that are really troubling him and not equipping him well enough to, perform well in that. So that's another point. Mistaking cause and effect. If cause and effect are confused, then we are unlikely to find an effective solution. For example, you have you are expecting a courier, and you are trying to reach out to the courier man for the courier, and you think that that's the cause of the problem as to why you have not received the courier. But when you go back into the steps and see, actually the address that was written, when the courier was sent out was incorrect. So that was actually the cause of the whole problem and not really the effect, which was the courier not being delivered. So these are the barriers one needs to watch out, perceptual barriers that one needs to watch out for problem solving. Now coming to the next one is the emotional blocks. As the name suggests, is all the things that we feel that stop us to solve problem accurately. So wherever we could find the anagrams or the acronyms, we have written it below.
Anita,
okay, thank you. So the emotional blocks could be, fears of making mistakes or looking foolish, and that itself is the first thing, that makes us not look at the problem fully, and we end up making mistakes or, not understand even the given set of problem or want to take a step ahead on looking at new proper solutions. Impatience, when somebody is really impatient to solve a problem, either due to desire to succeed quickly, or he wants to just wants to let go the discomfort quickly and finish the problem. So he or she will just take up the first solution which comes in mind and just go ahead and try to solve that. So that also then does not give us the full solution or the effective solution for that matter. Another would be fear of taking risk, where one is does not want to take risk, and again his fears of making mistakes or looking foolish, all of it together kind of works in his mind that kind of stops him from looking at the problem to solve it. Sometimes even the overconfidence or wanting to take too many risks also can be a major major block to even solve a problem that can put the solution in jeopardy for that matter. Avoiding anxiety, need for order, these are something where these are very common blocks when somebody wants all the information to be available, not to have any ambiguous situation when you start a problem. That itself can cause anxiety. So when you see that I have not been given enough information to work upon, I cannot move forward. So that itself causes an anxiety. Or fear of security, fear of not being able to make decisions, and over dependence on somebody to help you out. All of that can cause anxiety, leading to them not being able to solve the problem. Lack of challenge is another emotional block that comes into play, where if someone has been doing a very routine kind of a job and does not see much benefits and losses, he may not want to tackle the problem, and only once it becomes kind of an emergency or a severe one, he may want to he has to look at it. But lack of challenge can really makes him as a chalta hai attitude, and would not want to look at that problem in its full force. So F that dash final is the acronym we have given, where you can remember these points under emotional blocks. Moving on to the next block is the intellectual block. these intellectual blocks are where, you know, the person lacks the necessary intellectual skills or is unable to use them effectively to solve a problem. So yesterday Jiva had taken this example of the, you know, classical example of 9-dot problem, where you know, we all know how it can be done, but we are not, we all have the intellectual skills, but we are not just able to use them effectively for that. Once you know it, then it becomes easier to solve it at any given point in time, right? So that's, you know, we kind of looked at that problem yesterday. So the points under intellectual blocks are lack of knowledge or skill in problem solving process, lack of creative thinking. So, you know, these are the common blocks. If somebody does not have the requisite knowledge or has got the enough training to look at problems from the, you know, initial state to how to arrive at a goal state and get to the problem, that can also be a natural way of, you know, stumbling onto not being able to solve the problem. Creative thinking, if one practices it, then, you know, you can really develop your creative thinking in even the situations like this. But yes, that itself can be a block. So one part of emotion also goes there, that I am not creative enough, you know, that emotion can also kind of block you to even look at your creative thinking. That's, you know, just linking emotional blocks with intellectual blocks here. One is unable to think or switch from one type of thinking to the other. Let's say if, you know, the problem statement has been given in a more visual form. So wanting to convert from that visual thinking to verbal may or may not be very easy. So that also can become, you know, a problem in terms of if the person does not want to really look at it, that can become a problem. The another common block is not being methodical. So as we have seen, to solve a problem, one needs to go a step-by-step approach. Even one step here and there can, you know, you may jump after you have done the interpretation of the problem. You can really jump the second 2-3 points, but more or less the sequence of following a step-by-step process is very important. And if you tend to avoid that, if even the first step is not looked at it properly, one can, you know, have a problem in the later stage of arriving at the effective solution. The other point is lack of knowledge or skill in using the language of the problem. What this means is that, let's say a script is written. That script may be in a very technical software language. And let's say there is a new technical writer who has come and who wants to understand, but he does not have the requisite understanding of that particular, you know, software language that is there. So he will not be able to, he will find that as the initial block for him to even attempt, you know, at that problem. Another example could be, you know, if something is written, you know, if a statistical problem is written, and as a layman, you know, who does not understand statistics or does not understand mathematics, that person will not be able to even understand that given problem as to what he's supposed to do. So these are the intellectual blocks where he does not have the intellectual skills to even look at that particular problem. Using inaccurate information, using inadequate information, ones which you are not able to understand, that again is another intellectual block that one faces while solving a problem. So the other block or the other barrier in solving a problem is expressive block. Expressive is where one is unable to communicate in the way required to produce an effective solution. So if, you know, you use a wrong language, you know, the same example kind of carries here, where you have been asked to, when, let's say, you know, when you have been asked to represent a statistical problem in a statistical language, but you end up writing in too many words and you actually are using a layman language. So just the opposite I'm using here. At that point in time, the other person who understands statistics, and when he's reading, you know, just the plain words, he may not be able to understand in some form. So using a wrong language again can be, you know, the one which is used as a communicative language can again pose a problem. Unfamiliarity with a particular application of a language. This was, one of the blogs which I had heard Praharsh speaking, where, they can speak and write, they can read and write Malayalam, but they are not able to speak or communicate in the required language. So they're not able to apply the usage of that language. And if somebody in a work setup, if you are not of a specific domain, let's say, you are working in a counseling space, or you are working in a human resources space, or you are in a software space. So if you're working in different, so if you try to kind of communicate in a language which is little different, that can also cause a block in expressing that particular problem. What we have also seen in my work career, what I have seen is, because I have done HR system implementations where as a user, when HR has to explain to the technical person as to how their processes work, the HR person will use a lot of the jargons that they are used to using it, which a technical person may not be able to see. The coder will not be able to really understand that. So then that gap brings in where the requirements that I would take to build up a system will not be really accurate enough. And the system that will get developed will have many software errors and bugs at latest point in time. So that is the initial stage of expressing where it can go wrong majorly. The other one is where you are assuming that your audience already understands. So in the same example, as a domain person, if I really assume that the person that I'm explaining, he already understands what I'm saying. So I, very casually use those jargons without even realizing that the person is not really able to understand. Even in any counseling session, when you tend to use certain, theorists and theories and all of that, the other person may not be really be able to understand. So that is assuming, and that can cause a block. The other two expressive blocks are passive management style and dominant management style. Passive management style, where the management is not really keen and you as a person are finding it difficult to kind of exert your influence in communicating your ideas, to convince them about your ideas. That is, blocks you to even move forward in a particular problem that you're facing. Dominant in management style could be where consciously or unconsciously, your tone is a bit dominant or a bit controlling, where the other person whom you're communicating kind of takes a step back and is very hostile to even listening to your ideas. So that can be an expressive block. The other two blocks, and the acronym that we have used is U2DIP. So U2DIP in this. So next one is environmental blocks and the cultural blocks. So what are the environmental blocks? Environmental blocks are the external distractions that inhibits deep, prolonged concentration while solving a problem. It could be, social or physical environmental factors. So the physical factors could be distractions like a noisy setup or too much loud music that does not allow you to look at the problem and you're getting disturbed. Physical discomfort, the classic example that is given is poorly designed chairs, which is a sad story of many of the organizations, which gives you a discomfort. Or, physical discomfort could be that, the water cooler is placed so far away that, you find it a real discomfort to even go there, can get you irritated when you have to come back and solve something. Stress, the deadline pressures, the wanting to do best can again cause stress and hinders your creative thinking ability. Monotonous work, where you work in an autopilot mode and you tend to overlook the problems or you're blind to the problems when they occur. So these are the physical factors that that affect your problem solving. The other environmental block, which is the other part, which is a social one, are the management style. Okay, management style where the culture is not very open. It does not give you the freedom or the independence to do things individually or with in the teams. They say yes but no, kind of an attitude. which makes the person very demotivated, and he ends up giving up and not even wanting to look at. So this is another environmental block. Lack of support, where if you're working in teams and there is not enough communication and there is not enough support that you get when you have to look at one problem together, to kind of be successful in solving that particular problem. And expectations of others. So expectations could be, when somebody does not expect much from you. So you are not, it's okay for you to just, put forth whatever is the simpler solutions and be okay with it. Probably they are happy with you. They don't want you to, they are okay with what you're doing, but that can, put you as a person, not wanting to kind of exceed or, go beyond your limits to do better. Or the other could be, which can, the expectation is so high that it creates a stress and can create another block for you to work on the problem. So the last one is the cultural block. I know I'm going a bit fast. If there's anything, I can take it up later. Yeah. Cultural blocks is where it is, when one tends to conform to set customs and norms and not question them. So as humans, we tend to not question the status quo when it comes to culture or norms also. Not many times, we just take it what it is. And that is an impediment, actually. So when you're looking at the problem, because of this inherent nature of not questioning the status quo, you don't even question or reason as to why this problem one is facing, or why this particular thing is being done the way it is being done. So that can cause a problem. Change, the dislike of change is another block. Though we say that change is constant and one should, embrace it, but that is actually at times threatening to certain people when they're not willing to change or not okay with the change that's happening. Change for change's sake is also very dangerous. So there has to be a balance for both. It's a common myth that, if there is too much of fun at workplace or otherwise in a society setup, that people are not very productive, but it is actually the other way around. But yes, that's a block in many people's mind who work in a very serious setup and the culture is a bit not very conducive, to be open to such fun activities at workplace or in any situation for that matter. That can create a block. Feelings, intuition, and subjective judgments are unreliable. So this again is a very is a mental block in many people's mind, that intuition is something that should not be unreliable. And I have seen in work setup when people say that I feel, this is, the minute they say I feel, there's a judgment. They do not even want to hear what you have to say even further. But when you replace saying I, instead of saying I feel, I say I think, then they are open to even listen to you. So these intuitive feelings are not really given weightage, or because people think that cannot be measured or communicated, and it's basically unreliable and not trusted. But when you look at the most of the experiments that are being done, they start with a hunch actually, and then they are proven to be, to see that that's really right. So that's how actually intuition works. But I'm just saying that this is one of the blocks that people have in mind, and that sometimes can be even internal, which needs to be looked at while solving a problem, and go with the intuition. Overemphasis on competition or cooperation. So when there is a strongly cooperative environment, people don't want to express too many ideas because they don't want to stand out or go against somebody in the group. And if it is a strongly competitive environment, just to prove their point, they are not willing to even listen to the ideas of others. So both over cooperation or over competition can work as an impediment to solving a problem at hand in a group or a team. Taboos, the last one under cultural blocks, and the last one where what is a taboo? Taboo is regarded as distasteful or harmful, in any problem solving setup. So one may have many taboos for that matter. For example, a common taboo that I have seen earlier is when freshers, being part of an important meeting were considered as taboos, where, it was a general feeling that if they are included, they will not really add to anything. But instead, when people have started becoming open about that, they find that, freshers do give novel ideas, and they help you to look with a fresh perspective at many things. So that taboo needs to be removed, which helps you to kind of open up and look at the problem better. So these are all the blocks which are the impediments or the barriers for problem solving. So one can kind of overcome these blocks by relearning, by looking at the analogous problems, how they have been solved, and how one kind of went through the emotion, things, or what kind of environmental blocks that they faced. Those can be kind of summed up, and when they have a similar situation or a similar problem, they can try and overlook these and move forward and doing at least the next problem in a much more effective way. So moving on to the next one. I hope everyone is awake. Okay, the other barriers the other barriers are learning, the different learning styles, cognitive barriers, lack of transfer of structure, and lack of transfer skills. So many people learn things in a different manner. So everyone has their own learning style, or it could be a mix of both also, where one learns either visually, orally, step-by-step method in a more organized manner, or completely disorderly fashion. They love to go from chaotic fashion also. Some like to think on a problem introspectively, some like to discuss openly with others. So these are the various styles. So in a group, when we are looking at, so one needs to be aware that people have different styles, and kind of give out the problem in such a way that all of these could be considered as well. Then even the thinking style can be gender linked. So one of the examples that is given here is that females tend to be more organized and relate data more efficiently than others. So that's one of the thinking style that they have given here. But yeah, so one needs to be aware of these because that can at times also cause barriers. Or the whole idea is one needs to kind of understand when you are dealing with a problem, and if it is human specific problem, then what are the characteristics of that person at a high level. If you can identify, that will help you to overcome that particular problem when you're trying to solve that particular thing. Cognitive barriers, it could be inability to identify and use concepts in a more similar situation. Sometimes in new situations you can kind of use the learnings of your previous experiences in the previous projects or previous experiences of those problems. You can use those similar analogy in the new situations. You may not be able to use the complete version of it, but at least some parts which you think can help you to at least, move 4 steps ahead, then why not use it? So that is the structure that one can transfer. And if the lack of it is what will be the barrier that one will face. Okay. Lack of transfer skills. So we will cover this functional fixedness where, one is able to see at the concept has only one use and not really go beyond. That can be one of the barriers. And the superficial transference, where you are just, not reading between the lines, but just looking at the words, that is a very superficial transfers that will happen. But when somebody is really doing the transferring or, doing, having an understanding with the other person, it's better to link it with more deeper and more meaningful way of explaining things. So that can help overcome these barriers. Yeah. Okay, coming to the next topic, it's about teaching and learning strategies that enhance problem solving skills. So the standard one that we see and which we have gone through is the traditional instructional mode of teaching, which is the pedagogical strategy, as the name suggests. And the other two, pedagogical means teacher-centered, and the other two are the methodical strategies. These are the strategies that can enhance the problem-solving skills. So this is a little different from, moving away from the barriers. They're just giving you tips as to what can be developed or what can be used as a strategy that can help people to develop their problem-solving skills. So I was saying promoting transfer and dialogues are more learner-centered methodological strategies. Coming to the pedagogical strategies, in this approach, the teacher addresses the emotional, psychological, and cognitive barriers to problem solving. What we are also suggesting, what is being suggested here is over and above the traditional style of having a monologue discussion, you create as a teacher or an instructor, create a comfortable learning environment. For example, on the first day of the class, have an open discussion where you share with them what is the curriculum, how you will go about, how the assignments would be done, how you will try to assess them. So they have a clear picture of what is there in store for them, in their entire learning of the particular course that they are enrolled. So, and encourage them to share their concerns and fears. So this way you make them more comfortable and then encourage them to have class discussions, actively involve them. These are the effective strategies that can help to enhance the problem solving skills. Give them more problems in groups or individuals, accept multiple attempts of a solution for an assignment. Also explain the concepts through illustrations using graphics. Now we also have audio, video, this gets exposed with now online learning that we are having. Even audios and videos help in quick uptake of any learning. As we have also seen our study group, we have a lot of audios that Seema and many others kind of share that helps to quickly absorb the learning. So this can also help in the problem solving skills to be developed or enhanced for that matter. One can also employ the ideal solution strategy where you identify the problem, define the problem, explore all the possible strategies, act and look back. So, just to take back an example of how we, when we had to do this teach back, we kind of used this concept of ideal in that. It's not a problem actually, we would say, but yes, we decided to, do this teach back and we said, okay, let's how we will do it. And, we explored the possibility that we both will pitch in, we'll take it half and the other will take it half. And, have a presentation created, where we had also had a discussion, evaluated us as to how we were going about. We did a bit of a pitch ready also before we came on to this particular teach back today. So we kind of used this, I'm just linking it how we also a bit of it used in today's teach back that we are doing. So this can be kind of employed in any kind of enhancing the skills of problem solving or any other training sessions that one wants to use as well. Okay, there seems to be a slide garbad. Okay. Then the other two, though pedagogical strategies, has come in as has been one of the questions in the exams that has been asked. Promoting transfer and dialogue as such has not been really asked. So I will quickly give you an overview as to what it means, just for the understanding sake. As I said, these are methodological strategies which are more learner-centered. So promoting transfer, just, you can look at the picture that I have, where the learning is being kind of infused in. So basically promoting transfer and dialogues are kind of interlinked. Promoting transfer, if you understand the word knowledge transfer, just kind of stick to that, where you are transferring the knowledge of whatever experiences in a particular situation that you've had or any work related that things you have done, you're just passing on that information, to that other person. So to take an example of the counseling session which Simran had just covered, so just let me just elaborate a little bit. So here I will take a person who is an expert counselor, or who's the most seasoned counselor. Let me not use the word expert. It's a more seasoned counselor and somebody who's like entering this counseling skills, and they are taking a session. So for you to kind of train this person or transfer of what can be done by him in future, individually or in group at a later stage, you involve him in these counseling sessions, him or her. Please don't get just excuse me by using him only. So you allow that person to be part of these counseling sessions, and where you take them through as to what he or she needs to be doing initially, how he needs to understand the problem, how he needs to ask the question, what are the right way of asking things, what could be avoided. So these are the various things. So you're doing a lot of deep understanding, and not just at a superficial level of transferring the information, right? And you're using a similar situations where one can explain, in this similar situations, you can do X, Y, Z. In the other situations, you can do X, Y, Z. So you're transferring this knowledge to that person, and then come back. And when you allow this person, so there is a kind of a on-the-job training is also happening, right? So when you come back and allow this person to start attending the sessions on his own, or on her own, you go back and kind of share and openly discuss as to what could have worked well, or what could they would have done better, or what was working really nice. So these helps to have an open dialogue and helps to instill these skills in a much better fashion. So that's about the promoting transfer and having a dialogue. I hope I could make sense. And here also again we are saying that we create a comfortable environment and help to overcome their fears and anxieties, and also any kind of cognitive barriers that may have, where you are helping them to learn on the job by giving those specific tips and training tips or strategies to kind of work upon. So this whole dialogue can help the person to better adopt to the problem solving skills. Yeah. Okay, I will go back to the slide because I think I've misplaced using the slides. Just give me a minute. Okay, coming to functional fixedness. So I've highlighted this as purple because this is a commonly asked question. Apart from the barriers question, one or the other questions have been asked from the barriers. So that's why it took some time to even explain that. Now, what is functional fixedness? It is one of the classical obstacle that has been spoken about. This term was defined by Carl Duncker in 1935, where it is the tendency to see objects as having only a single typical traditional use. And one has a mental block to even look at it in a very different way. For example, potato, which is used as a vegetable, can be used as a incense stick holder as well. So it has a different use where you can look at it beyond its a common use that is there. And what it says is that the brain has a pattern recognition. Brain is a pattern recognition engine. Rather than looking at each and every problem individually, it creates chunk of similar problem that fits into a pattern. That makes the brain very efficient at what it does. And by chunking it, it overlooks, what could be a simple usage of the particular object or situation in hand. So that is functional fixedness. The classical experiment which was done by Duncker called candle box experiment, where he took the person into a room and he gave him and the set of other participants 3 cardboard boxes filled with candles, stacks, and matches respectively, and an ashtray, paper clips, string, pencils, and tin foil. So what he expected them to do is mount the candles at eye level on the wall, posing it as a vision experiment that would be conducted later. So, but he wanted them to mount the candles as an experiment that he was conducting. The outcome was that 43% found solution to the candle problem. So he hypothesized that they fixated on the common function of the cardboard box. which is just to serve as a container. So when he realized this as a, fixation that, those subjects are having, what he did is he went and he emptied the cardboard boxes and he left the contents on the table and the cardboard boxes separately. And immediately all the other participants, apart from those 43% participants, were able to solve this problem. So he says that once he was able to break their functional fixedness, they all could mount the candle on the wall. Okay, so that's one of the classical examples. There is another example which is given in the book called Coin Problem. I am not covering in detail at this moment, but if anybody wants me to explain, I could do that later. Actually, I'm not very convinced about the solution they have given, but nevertheless, I will take it up later. I'll quickly cover the last 2 points of the topic of this chapter, which is, though these 2 things have not really come in the examination, again, I'll just give you a brief overview of both the points. Using incomplete or incorrect representations. So when the initial interpretation of the problem itself is wrong or is not understood correctly, that itself is the difficulty the problem solver will face. Okay. And any assumptions that are made during the interpretations, as Simran was explaining in critical thinking, if they are not looked at it explicitly and seen whether they are workable, okay assumptions to be made or not okay assumptions to be made, if one does not delve into that deeply, that can again be a difficult situation for the problem solver. So Perkins in 1981 has cited a problem statement. He says there is a man at home, that man is wearing a mask. There is a man coming home, what's happening? So I've given you 2 pictures. So what comes to you in your mind, when you read this problem statement, unless you have read the book already?
I think it's COVID.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the, what happens is, again, it's kind of an, one of your functional fixedness. The one we look at the home, the immediate thing is a man coming to a house, right? But actually he's talking about a baseball game. Where this person is playing, he's wearing a mask. Obviously, they wear mask when they play a baseball game, and somebody is going to throw a ball. So that is where they're saying the man is coming home. So that is where he said that initially only if you've understood the problem incorrectly, your entire assumption is wrong, and then solving the problem will also, you will go terribly wrong. The next one is where Squads in 1971 has given a success tip of problem solving, where he says if your representation is very, very important, it can make a difference. If you use your pictorial representation by, using charts and flow charts rather than writing just down the facts, it helps the person to understand better. So in a lot of presentations, people have done presentations and you have to do some kind of analysis, or you want to do some easy understanding. If there are, pie charts or graphs or, any kind of flow diagram, it helps the person to take them through very easily. And it quickly registers, especially in the analytical kind of a thing, if somebody is presenting. But even otherwise also in explaining a problem also, many people follow a flow chart way of, doing yes, no, and all of that, which helps them to know where they fall and what needs to be done to easily tackle those specific problem areas in the various steps that they may have. Yeah. So these are the tips that one can use to effectively solve a problem. The last one in this chapter is lack of problem-specific knowledge or expertise. So most of the problems that has been discussed are, where it's a very puzzle kind of a problem, where people may have, even they will not understand initially, like a non-9 dot problem, but the way to arrive at is usually the same. But in real life situation, in the examples that are given in our textbooks, like in statistics and computer programming or management books and all, there are many real life situations that are there. And these are solved differently. And here, specifically, they are saying that what you need to note here is the experts and the novices approach, is different while solving a problem. Novice means anybody who's new to that particular problem or to that particular role that he or she's playing, right? Domain knowledge is very important. Domain knowledge, I'm sure most of you know, is the specific knowledge or expertise knowledge that one may have. Like if somebody is a counselor, so initially you're a novice and then you kind of get specialized and that becomes your specific understanding or you get trained in that particular domain to pick that up, right? So that's your domain knowledge is important, and that is the key even when you are looking at that specific problem. Unless you don't have even the basic understanding, it's very difficult for me, not being a software engineer, to understand the software skills. So it's like that, or for a medical practitioner for that matter, right? Dee Groot in 1965 and Chase and Simon in 1973, they carried out some chess experiments to kind of highlight the differences between novices and expert in the chess games. So, both of them primarily put the fact across that in chess games, those who are chess masters and those who are mere players can easily find, distinguish them, is even though they would have the same number of possibilities to play a chess game, but the winning move is usually of the chess master. That's how they have identified. And they have also said that the chess master is easily able to remember the pieces when they are placed in a chess game, and that's how he kind of works well in his mind and plays the games well. While even Chi, Feltovich, and Glaser has emphasized the domain knowledge of experts, whereas Goel and Grafman in 2000, says that expertise is not enough. There are other factors like medical status, mental status, and other related aspects that can affect the problem-solving ability, even though you are an expert in a particular field, right? So that's from me. So I'll just quickly sum up. So in this entire chapter, you would see that we have covered the impediments of problem solving, even though there are two main strategies that have been given to enhance the problem solving skills. And we have also discussed the classical obstacles like einstein and functional fixedness. Functional fixedness has been asked a couple of times in the exams. And researchers have spoken about novice versus expert differences in problem solving, though this question has not really been asked so often. So I don't know what's the time, but yes, I'm done and I'm open to questions.
Yeah, few things which I am actually confused on the material itself, not the ones which you have explained. So one thing is the way this chapter is organized, right? In this particular thing, I'm a bit confused because see what they did. If you see the first section, which is talking about the effective problem solving,